Okay, thanks so much, Deontay, for that wonderful introductions and welcome to everybody. That was so much energy and vibe from Jamaica. We hear a lot about Jamaica, and of course, the most popular person we know from that country, Bob Marley. So we love his music, we love Jamaica. So thank you so much to all the Jamaicans and other people in the house. I want to say that we are pleased that you were able to make our time to join us today at the African Press Club to witness one of the series that we have called Discover Africa series. And today, as you have seen already in the flyer, we will be talking about Botswana. We have a great lineup for you today because we have a panel of young, knowledgeable professionals, people that understand what they're talking about. They have information, they are from the ground, so we don't have any media mediating between us and them. You're going to be hearing live from the horse's mouth. Please begin to get ready your questions after their presentations. You're going to be free to ask any questions. So now I want to proceed by introducing our presenters. We will start with our lead speaker, who is Mabato Motsamai. So Mabato Motsamai is a development practitioner who believes in reducing inequality through effective, inclusive governance systems. Her work encompasses project coordination, facilitation, advocacy, and communications. Adopting SDG 17, Motsamai is the founder of the Afrolutionist, a digital institution that enhances critical discussions and projects on inclusive development in Africa. Afrolutionist has engaged on various global projects, including research, coordination with UNUIGH, and co-facilitated the first policy hackathon in Botswana. Mabato is the co-founder of the Botswana Youth Jobs Fair, an annual fair that stimulates real-time job readiness training and employment activity through multi-stakeholder engagement. She is currently a board member of the Botswana National Youth Council, Akina Mamawa Africa, ITU Generation Connect Youth Visionaries Board, and an AFR 100 Youth Ambassador. Mabato has been recognized as one of the most influential persons of African descent in 2020. The co-speaker today is Bokani Mathape. Bokani has been having some technical difficulties joining us. I hope that she will be able to connect from Botswana where she is. So Bokani Mathape is the founder and president of Women in Tourism in Botswana. Through her work in tourism for the past 5 years, she has acquired a diverse repertoire of skills and expertise in areas such as camp management, team leadership, guest relations and interaction, as well as relief management. In 2018, Bokani was awarded a place in a prestigious exchange program that exposed her to the international hospitality industry. She now uses what she learned on that program to make significant contributions to the growth of the tourism and hospitality industry in Botswana. Her immense passion for the industry, especially with regards to women development and leadership in tourism, motivated her to establish Women in Tourism Botswana. Through this NGO, Bokani intends to inspire and empower women in the industry so that they can be fellow game changers and industry movers. Then finally to Deante Livingston, who is our moderator today, Deante from Jamaica. Deante Livingston is a final year student of the University of the West Indies, majoring in political science with a minor in international relations. He serves as the head of PR for the Every Miracle Foundation and also as regional director for Region 1 of the New Jamaica Foundation, a youth-led organization that serves to better the country and youths of Jamaica. Deante is a fun-loving individual with a passion for PR and content creation. He loves to be involved in the development of his community, and such and as such sits on 2 of his university youth presidency councils. His life motto is, "There's a time and place for everything." Deante lives by this sentiment and applies it to his daily life. I'm so excited we have, a group of young people today handling this program. When I sent out the flyer to my friend, she looked at it and she said, "Oh my God, they're so young. The faces, the energy in their faces." And I said, "Please do not make me feel old already." But I'm excited. Thank you so much for being part of this. I will hand it over to Mabato now to begin with her presentation. Mabato, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chogo, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. Hi, everyone. As Chogo mentioned, my name is Mabato Mutsamai. Just sharing the screen quickly to begin my presentation. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it will be presented by myself, and my colleague Bokani Matape is usually in the chat function. Unfortunately, she's having technical difficulties, so she was going to speak largely on tourism. So if there's any questions in related to that, please place them in the chat as we move along in the presentation, and she'll be able to interact with you all that way. But I will be presenting on her behalf as well. I also wanted to preface the discussion with the fact that in our presentation, Botswana is a very unique country in that even before all the different institutions and civilizations, there's been human activity for so long. So I'll be talking about Botswana's journey into being the country that it is today through the activities that even prefaced when we had different skin colors and different hair textures. So just to begin, Botswana is a semi-arid landlocked country which borders between Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. It's a flat country topically, but it's also characterized by 2 distinct areas. First, the Kalahari Desert, which we also share with South Africa and Namibia, as well as one of the few inland deltas in the world, which is Okavango Delta, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's one of the most sparsely populated and unequal societies on a global level, with only 2.4 million people in a population. So Botswana is slightly the size of, a little bit bigger than Texas. So imagine 2.4 million people living in Texas in comparison. Botswana, in terms of its etymology, means land of Tswana. So the people from Botswana are called Batswana. A singular person from Botswana is called a Motswana. The language, the national language that we speak, is called Setswana. Due to these identities came around along the independence movement and decolonization movement in forming a united front and united nationality and ideology through African nationalism. So for all Botswana, whether they do speak the Setswana language or not, as a citizen, you'd be referred to as a Motswana, and a collective as Botswana. The country has 2 official languages, which is English and Setswana, and it has over 20 indigenous languages that are spoken from multiple cultures and ethnicities. This includes Kalanga, Seyeyi, Gwi, Naro, Kalahari, Herero, Shirumbukushu, Sibirwa, Sotsapong. There are many, Setawana. There are many languages by different regions, and we're all characterized by our diversity. Well, we're united through our diversity. Anthropologically speaking, Botswana, some archaeological finds have determined that there have been human civilizations and human civilization activity for over 400,000 years. In 200,000 of the 400,000 years, they were modern humans of which we still see some of the cultures and nations that are practiced in the similar way that they were practiced 200,000 years ago. So there's over at least 70,000 years of cultural preservation and very advanced indigenous languages, which are usually the clicking languages that we tend to hear that come from the San people, or rather better known as Bakwe. Archaeologically speaking as well, hominids have been discovered in Botswana, determining their existence for over 2 million years, approximately. We have some tourist attractions and destinations that are also linked to this, and some of the stories as well are encoded in our storytelling and our culture. We also have rock paintings, which I'll speak towards. In the background of this presentation is Tsodilo Hills. The rock paintings from Tsodilo Hills have been determined to be close to 70,000 years of age. There have been various political and economic systems, as you can imagine, over the years, which have included pastoralism, mineral trade by various nations, which include the Tswapong Empire and the Kalanga Empire. There were different political systems in this area, which also include nomadism, matrilineal and patrilineal political systems. This was obviously before the colonial period. So now I'll move from the way back when 70,000 hominid modern human development to talk about Botswana in the colonial period between the 1800s to 1966 and a little bit beyond. Before Botswana was an independent state in the colonial period, we were known as Bechuanaland, but even before then, our area was marked as Terra Nullius, which means land of no men. In the Berlin Conference, in the Berlin Conference, as we know, where the European colonizers were partitioning Africa and seeing the places that they would find fit to colonize, they earmarked off the current area that we're in as land of no men, basically not seeing any economic potential or extractives that were in the area, particularly at a time when they were interested in gold and oil and coal. However, during this time, during the scramble and even post-scramble in the 1800s, there was a missionary, a Scottish missionary by the name of John Mackenzie, who noticed a further expansion of the Germans, Portuguese, and Boers, who are also Dutch, who are now known as Afrikaners, and developed this campaign working with our leadership, our traditional leadership, which are the chiefs, and went to Britain and determined an agreement with the then British government to have Botswana marked as a British protectorate, protecting us from potential colonization from Germans, Portuguese, and the Boers. John Mackenzie, of course, as I noted, was accompanied by the three chiefs, which are also pictured in this background. This is in the background image, it's a monument of the three chiefs. In our language, we call them Dikhosi. The name of these Dikhosi was Kgosi Sebele the first, Kgosi Batoeng the first, and Kgosi Khama the third. And we managed to obtain protectorate status. At this time, because the British form of rule was more known as indirect rule, the chiefs were able to self-determine within the confines of protectorate administration. And the British administration was more concerned with police control and police administration and border control. So there was a lot more movement around self-governance into some of our political and economic activities, though they were limited underneath the administration at the times. At the time as well, in the 1900s, there was a campaign for the protectorate to be handed over to South Africa or Rhodesian colonies. However, this campaign was met with a lot of resistance from our traditional leaders, the Khosis who were self-governed were, at the time, self-governed at the time. And this continuous campaign that happened for decades, also started to develop, birthing the development of political parties that were aiming to organize for their own independence as a country. Subsequently, independence was declared on September 30th in 1966, after the British government accepted proposals of self-determined government, of Botswana being a self-determined government in 1964. Sir Seretse Khama, who is one of the, I can't remember the word, Sir Seretse Khama is one of the children of Bat Khosi Khama III. He became the leader of the Botswana Democratic Party, subsequently becoming the first president of Botswana. So now I'm speaking about Botswana as its independent, in its independent form. In terms of politically speaking, in terms of our political atmosphere, we are relatively a peaceful country with regards to war and conflict. However, over time, due to high rising inequality, we found an increase in crime and an increase in poverty, as well as a human-wildlife conflict over the years. These, of course, are being mitigated differently and managed differently through multi-sectoral state and non-state action, a rise in civic participation rather, and a rise in entrepreneurship with other government interventions that are aimed at reducing unemployment, reducing inequality, as well as enhancing entrepreneurship within the country and creating more economic participation. I'll get into that when I speak on the country's economy. It's also one of the least corrupt countries in the continent. However, in the scope of Africa's, not even just looking at Africa's corruption index in itself, but within the country, we have seen a slight growth in corrupt practices and looting by influential political leaders. This, of course, has been met with increased civic participation and increased political participation with opposition parties. Through this, yes, as I noted, there's been a rise in opposition leadership and influence, which has been encouraging more youth engagement and more youth and civic engagement in rural areas. With regards to our governance structure, Botswana is a multi-party democratic republic driven by social democratic values that also come from our cultural values that are shaped along democracy. I just wanted to note that Botswana does have, in the pre-colonial time, we have our own judiciary and political system, what was known as the Khotla system. And within the Khotla system, there are a set of values around how forms of engagement in society. Khotla means court. And in the court, we have the one major rule, which is in Setswana, Mahokwa Khotla Amantle, which states that any words that are said within this court space are beautiful words or affirming words, but they're also valid words. So which is a marker of inclusivity and showing a sign of how our systems pre-colonially were about being inclusive. This is in how we see that in Botswana, we have a parliamentary system, which has the members of parliament. So we have the House of Parliament, but we also have House of Dikhosi, retaining the power that the chiefs had in the pre-colonial time. They have their own customary system, which is seen in par as with the statute system. So we have the customary laws. Because of this, we have the statutes. And of course, we do have judicial precedents, which we do find in case law and case law systems. Elections in the country are held every 5 years. political parties select presidents, while the public votes for members of parliament and councillors per constituency that they're in, and the ruling parties are determined by the majority seats. Moving on to the country's economy, Botswana currently has a mineral-based, non-renewable mineral-based economy and is market-oriented. It's largely informed by Botswana's diamonds, which mark as 85% of export earnings and a quarter of the economy. Other forms of mining, such as nickel, copper, soda ash, coal, and iron ore. Tourism is also a large contributor to the economy, agriculture, as well as livestock. We are, however, the government is also looking towards creating a knowledge-based economy to diversify the economy to be a bit more knowledge-based and not reliant on the diamond, which has given us a lot of, which has been fundamental towards the economy's growth, human literacy and our education systems, as well as our infrastructure, but we're also looking towards economic diversification through a knowledge-based economy. Botswana's currency is pula. Pula is also in Setswana is known as rain. So we see pula in forms of currency, but it's also a form of environmental currency as well, which informs our economy, right? And pula is a relatively strong currency in the continent. It is number 5 in the top 10 strongest currencies in the African continent. Our largest import partners are South Africa, Canada, and Israel with the minerals that we import, and as well as food security and other food and other import items. Our largest export partners are the UAE, Belgium, India, Singapore, Namibia, and Hong Kong. Unemployment in Botswana is at 23.3%, which is quite high in our opinion, with youth unemployment at 35%, noting that the youth bracket is between 15 to 35 in Botswana and make up 51% of the population. So we're largely a youth-based country. I guess it's 50-50. Speaking on entrepreneurship, the government has developed quite a number of self-employment programs and state loans and state grants for various entrepreneurs with an acute focus on youth and women in entrepreneurship development, and has also created different training programs with the local entrepreneurship authority as well as SEDA. So in Botswana, it is possible for either first-time entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs to seek state assistance to help refuel their business. This can come in the form of loans. This can come also in the form of grants. For people who want to be in different forms of entrepreneurship, particularly agriculture, they receive training on development of business plans and proposals. They can also receive training on different forms of new innovative ways of business. For example, in terms of agriculture, the local entrepreneurship authority, LEA, collaborates with different organizations and has created a program for hydroponic farming, a training program for hydroponic farming for people who do want to get into entrepreneurship. So there has been a rise in entrepreneurs to combat unemployment, but also to put the economic power back in the people. Notably, during COVID, we've seen a rise in consumer exports and a decrease in imports through an increase in entrepreneurship and the need for self-sustenance during lockdown. And we've also seen a rise in food security in the country because there's been more agricultural practices and commercialized agricultural practices in the country. All right, so I will be tapping into Bokani's part. I hope I do her justice, but I think that she could also add some few things in the chat if so. So as I noted earlier, the tourism sector is a significant contributor to Botswana's GDP, and it demonstrates its unique potential to contribute towards inclusive growth. In Botswana, tourism is characterized largely by wildlife tourism, meaning that a lot of international tourists come here to for safaris and to view animals and the nature reserves. But there's also been an increase in local tourism doing the same. We have two unique UNESCO heritage sites, which is the Okavango Delta, being one of the last main inland deltas in the world, as well as Tsodilo Hills, which is the hill that I noted earlier that has shown 70,000 years worth of rock art and art paintings. Botswana has pursued a high cost, low volume form of tourism, with the country's principal tourist attractions being game reserves and wildlife, as I previously shared. The tourism sector has contributed to 13.1% of Botswana's GDP 2 years ago, which was a 6.3% increase from the new millennium. And it has also accounted for 8.9% of total employment in the country, which is quite a large aspect, quite a large sector. On the 27th of September this year, it was World Tourism Day, which is spearheaded by the World Tourism Organization, as we know. And this year's theme was Tourism for Inclusive Growth. Our minister, Gireng, shared his statement highlighting that the second principle of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development goals is to leave no one behind. Hence, the theme focusing on opening up the economy and ensuring that the growth of tourism in Botswana is inclusive. She also highlighted that the Botswana Tourism Policy of 1990 has been revised and approved April this year. The revised policy looks towards unearthing more tourism potential through promoting product diversification and increasing the geographical spread of product offering. So the aim is to decentralize Botswana's tourism activity, not just to be based on wildlife in itself, but other aspects of tourism we have to offer, such as historical and educational tourism, the city, and other aspects. I'm also sharing here a few notable tourist attractions. These are the most these common ones, I guess, that people may know of, such as the Okavango Delta, the Moremi Gorge, Tsodilo Hills, Madzieng Footprints, and Makgadikgadi Pans. I will start with Moremi Gorge, which is known largely for its cultural and spiritual feeling and belief. It's one of those places that where you go to, you can just feel a strong aura or strong spiritual sense of peace and healing. And this is not by mistake. This Moremi Gorge is located in a town called Palape, near a town called Palape in Botswana. And it's a highly sensitive area to the Botswana nation, the Botswana culture and community, who associate the Moremi Gorge with cultural and spiritual beliefs. The gorge in itself has a lot of different bird species and unique, and the endangered Cape vultures in the area, which is great to explore with one of the museum guides when you get there. The Moremi Gorge is situated in the Tswapong Hills in the central district of Botswana. And it's known particularly for healing and praying for rain and receiving the rain and the like. The particular system of rain asking comes from the Botswana people. According to the culture, it's known as Dikomana. The Botswana believe that their ancestors live in these hills, and when there's no rain in the communities, they would go to the coverage at the Khotla, the court system in the area, and go to the hills where there's a cave. And they were led by the chief at this time, as well as a few elderly people who would carry seeds and other offerings to appease the ancestors to ask for rain. Once at the entrance of the cave, they would stop and hand over the seeds to the elderly persons, and the elderly persons would enter with the utmost humility and respect, and with rain asking for rain from the ancestors. Outside of the cave, the entire community would remain silent. And the practice of this within the cave is called dikomana, which is referred to the two drums that are being used when they communicate with their ancestors. So that's Komoremi Gorge. It's a very beautiful place, and it's got beautiful gorges, got beautiful waterfalls. It's a really nice place for one to just come and, rest and rejuvenate. Underneath the gorge is the Matsieng footprint. The Matsieng footprint is actually not too far from Gaborone. It's actually along the main road towards other parts of the country. And it's after a village called Rasesa. What makes the Matsieng Gorge unique is that it has engravings of a really large footprint. In Botswana's culture, in our culture, we have a lot of storytelling and folktelling where we talk about how we used to live with giants, and the giants are known as Dimo. And Matsieng would be known as one of these Dimos. And what makes it unique is that there's you can see his footprint on a slab of stone with some engravings, and he's remarked as like the first ancestor, and those that come, and all of us pretty much come after him. It's actually very similar to a story of a large dragon-like figure known as Panyape, which also lived along the area in the southern part of the country. All right, I'll then speak on the Makgadikgadi pans. The Makgadikgadi pans are actually one of Botswana's folklore telling about the effects of climate change, if anything. The Makgadikgadi pans were once Makgadikgadi Lake, and this lake was huge. It was around the size of Switzerland in mass, and over time, and this was, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And over time, this lake became drier and drier due to different forms of human activity, rise and falls of empires, rise and falls of economic activity. And yes, so these pans are also, they kind of transform at night. They almost look like moon craters. And you have so much access to the stars, and you can see like the beautiful plane between the stars and astrologically speaking, between the stars and the Makgadikgadi pans. Then I'll speak on the Tsodilo Hills. So the Tsodilo Hills are, excuse me, so the Tsodilo Hills are well known for their rock painting, and also known for the inhabitants of the hills being San people and the Hambukushu, who have occupied the hills now for the past 200 years, but have shown over 70,000 years of human activity in this area. There are 3 main hills known as the male, the female, and the child, and estimates that some of the inhabitation has been for 100,000 years, sorry, not 70,000, making it one of the world's oldest historical sites to have ever existed and been preserved. We also see within the hills, we see some pottery, we see iron, we see glass beads and shells and carved bones that date back to 90,000 years. So in this area, the Iron Age, the site in Tsodilo was called Divuyu, which dates back to 700 to 900 AD, and shows that 9 Bantu people have been living in these hills for over 1,000 years, and have some of these Bantu people connecting back to Central Africa. So this connects from Botswana right into the Cameroon, DRC area. And the hills also show some cattle farming, as well as some copper trading with jewelry, and glass beads coming from Asia. So it shows a lot of international economic activity before we presumed ourselves to be international. There's also been some excavations in this area which have extracted specularite, which is a glittery iron oxide derivative, which in early times was seen as a cosmetic iron piece, mineral piece. And yes, when you're in these hills, you see rock paintings over rock paintings over rock paintings. You'll see some elands, you can see some rhinos. You also see some very unfamiliar animals, which of course have become extinct over time. And so lastly, I'll be talking about the Okavango Delta. So the Okavango Delta is one of the last inland deltas, and it connects to the Kavango region in Namibia, as well as the region in Angola. We have actually developed a treaty between Namibia and Angola and Botswana to have the delta protected. It's also characterized by a nature reserve called the Moremi Game Reserve, which is a national park which is east of the delta, and is seen as one of the 7 natural wonders in Africa. I mean, if you can consider that the Okavango Delta has a lot of lush water and land, it contributes to so many different economies, not in Botswana alone, but in Namibia and Angola as well. And not too far from the Okavango Delta is the Kalahari Desert, where there's no water really, and it's a completely arid area. There's a lot of, I guess, wonder towards it in itself. So I think I'm done on tourism, and maybe we'll have more of those questions being guided to Bokani, and she'll share on the chat. I'm now going to speak about our different cultures and ethnicities. In the background of this picture is cows, which are one of Botswana's largest, I guess, form of trade or form of wealth historically, and it's still preserved in that nature. There are over 20 notable ethnicities and cultures in Botswana, though many are lumped between Setswana speaking and non-Setswana speaking. Examples of these ethnicities are across the regions, from the Kalahari Desert in the southwest region, who would be largely known as Kalahari, Bakwe, Banaro, and the like. Bakwe are also known as San people. The northwest region, which is known as Ngamiland, which is where the Okavango Delta exists, would be Baherero, Batawana, and Bayei. In the northeastern region, you'd find where closer to the Victoria Falls of Zambia and Zimbabwe, you'd find Barumbukushu, Bakalanga, and Balozi. In the central and southeastern region, you'd find Bakwena, Bakhatla, Bangwakezi. You'd also find Babirwa and Batswapong within the north and central parts. Of course, our country is not only characterized by indigenous cultures, but various cultures as well through different forms of settlement. So we'll also have non-African settlers of Asian and European descent, which includes British, Afrikaners, Indians, Chinese, and various Southwest Asian descendants. But this is also to say that there are various cultures and nationalities in Botswana. You're likely to find a community because we live in a global world anyway. So even if a lot of our participants are from Jamaica, you're likely to find a thriving Jamaican community here. So you'll always be home in Botswana. We have because we have different cultures, we also have different indigenous foods and beverages, such as, which are usually now created during significant cultural and social events, such as weddings or social gatherings. But you'd also find our indigenous food for sale in restaurants, and also in informal areas, because they're eaten quite commonly. Some are packaged and monetized economically. If so, the background actually shows some of these foods. Our indigenous food, which includes tsui. So tsui is from the water lilies from the rivers in the northern area. The root of the water lily would be pounded and then mixed with pounded meat. And usually the pounded meat would be beef. Seswa is pounded meat. Serobe being intestines of beef intestines. Bogobe jwale rotse. So bogobe is sorghum, and sorghum, which is pounded to be made fine and then mixed with water and cooked. And lerotse is a kind of melon. So we take the melon and then we take a part of that melon, the nice juicy part, and then we mix it in with the sorghum, as well as mopane worms. The mopane worms are coming from the pane tree, which is found in the Babirwa region, which is in central to northern Gaborone, northern Botswana, sorry. And how you extract it is the worms are taken from the tree and dried out, boiled with water and salt, and they're very tasty, very healthy, and very high in protein, and keto friendly. If there's anyone interested in that. We also have indigenous beverages such as gemere. Gemere is basically a form of a ginger ale that we produce through a fermentation process. It's one of the best drinks to drink during these times. It's summer this side in Botswana, and we usually have it with our specific events such as weddings. We have them also in terms of graduations, different cultural and family events. We also have different types of herbal teas. So Botswana has a very strong indigenous health systems through the usage of herbs and homeopathy to help aid in terms of boosting our immune system, as well as mitigating a few slight ailments. So we have trees such as lengana, we have sengaparile and musukojane. Sengaparile is a very distinct type of herb. It's a root actually that is largely found in the Kalahari region. It is very fundamental in helping alleviating pain, chronic pain. It helps with joints such as arthritis. It has also been, there's still research on this, but it's also been used as a form of treatment, cancer treatment. And it's also been used by a lot of large pharmaceutical companies. Some of them are based in Canada. Sengaparile is also found in Namibia. They have their own specific language to this. Lengana is a herb that is used to help open your lungs. Lengana was a particular herb that was used to help combat as a booster to help combat harsh COVID symptoms. We've seen this over the time in COVID. Of course, I need to have a disclaimer saying that it hasn't been certified as a healing mechanism, of course, for COVID, but it's particularly used as for respiratory ailments such as flus or asthma, or if you were in an area where there was a lot of air pollution. Lengana is pretty helpful for that. Musukojane is a kind of herb that is taken from the musukojane tree that is taken as a tea for assistance with immune boosting. It also helps with clearing your digestive system. I need to note with these types of herbs, the herbal teas, you take a little bit of the herb and mix it in a lot of water because of how strong it is. Yeah. So I think I'm towards the end of the presentation. So lastly, I wanted to speak about the Botho philosophy. The Botho philosophy comes from our Khotla systems. As I did share earlier, that Botswana has been able to preserve some of our indigenous political and economic knowledge and systems, and that due to the nature of what transpired, the activities that transpired in the colonial period. And one of the biggest legacies that we have managed to uphold is our Botho philosophy. Botho stemming from what would largely be known in East Africa and South Africa as Ubuntu, that your personhood is validated through the personhood of somebody else. Our historic philosophy of Botho facilitates that a person's humanity is rooted in the nature and the treatment of other people. Botho says motho ke motho ka batho, being a person is a person through other people, and it has remained as Botswana's pillar of our value systems that enforce various instruments in our government and also various instruments in our social spaces. So as an example, In Botswana, you greet, you greet strangers, you greet people if you're passing by. If you're in a shop and there's another customer, if you're passing each other, it's by nature to greet. If you are seeing shop assistants, you greet. If you enter a bus and you sit next to someone, you greet them. That's just one of the cultural practices of Boto. It's seen as extreme disrespect if you don't acknowledge a person, or you don't acknowledge that personhood by greeting them. Extreme disrespect. In fact, it can be met with, if you, for example, if you enter a store and you don't greet shop assistants, and you just come to them for help, or you don't greet a cashier, for example, and you expect them to serve you, they find that so disrespectful that they won't serve you until you greet them. Or they will say dumela mma, like hello, as a way to remind you to greet people and to have that the spirit of Boto within you. Beyond social interactions and beyond how we socialize with each other, the Boto philosophy has informed a lot of national instruments in Botswana, such as Vision 2016 and Vision 2036, which have pillars that inform Botswana's governance system, which also informs its inclusive development and also informs its economic strategies. So the Boto system is one of the pillars of how it's our reference point for our national strategies, for our economic strategies, but it's also a reference point for how we engage with each other. So if all else fails and you're new in this country, just remember Boto and you'll be able to move from that point. I have reached the end of our presentation, where in Setswana we say ra leboga for thank you, and I'm open to any questions and comments, even if it's anything that I didn't mention in the presentation in particular that I didn't talk about. This picture is a picture of the Kalahari at night. It's very beautiful, very scenic. There's no light there really, and the light that you won't get from, your devices will come from the stars. So thank you, everyone. I'm open to questions.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Mabato, can you?
Oh, stop sharing.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow. That was excellent. I'm trying to wrap around my head. Your presentation is so detailed. I didn't expect that level of detail. I mean, every aspect of the country, you really explained it. It's like you're in class and your professor is trying to explain to you what the country is about. It's really excellent. Thank you so much for that, Mabato. Bokani, who was the co-speaker, was unable to join us because of technical problems. So Mabato had to take on the presentation for both of them. So you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much, Mabato. I was taking notes while you were talking. So many things to see in Botswana. One of the questions I wanted to ask after your presentation was, why would someone want to go to Botswana? Look, after the presentation, I don't need to ask. There's so many reasons why you have to go to Botswana. I mean, talk about the Moremi Gorge, where you feel like you can get some healing. There's peace in the environment. Talk about running away from the cities. During COVID, people were dashing out of the cities to go to somewhere where you can at least move around and have some fresh air. So, that's a good one. You talked about the lake. And then the footprints were very fascinating as well. Shows that Africans have been on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years, the beginning of humankind, actually. The hills, I like, when you talk about there's a male part of the hill, there's a female, and then there's a child. So it's balanced. So it's not a world that is dominated by just men. There is a man, there is a woman, and there is a child. We're complete. I like the Okavango Delta that you mentioned, and the treaty also to protect that delta. It's so important. I'm so glad to hear that, because with the industrialization and African nations being pushed to industrialized. So many countries are, sort of felling trees. Companies come in and you cut down the trees because you need them to make furniture, to get natural resources in the region, and then animals are going extinct. So it's very good to see that they're working towards preserving that area. And then you talk about the philosophy, the Boto philosophy, and connecting with one another and greeting people. I think that's a general African thing. When we were growing up in Nigeria, you're being taught that once you step out of your house, greet every single person you meet on the street. It's so rude not to say hello to somebody, whether it's in the bus, whether you know them or not, just say hello. That's decency to do that. The rock paintings are fascinating as well. So many things. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that the audience is eager to begin to ask questions. I will hold on my questions for now so I can give the space for other people. So Deante, I will hand it over to you to manage the question and answer session.
Thank you so much. No, I don't know if I need to add anything to that, because that was a well put together summary. I must use the opportunity to say that that was an absolutely beautiful presentation. And I know for a fact that all of us on this call would have learned something, and as such have questions to ask. Me, myself, I have quite a bit of questions, and persons, would have sent me questions in my WhatsApp. So I have a lot of questions. Mabato, the persons then want to hear from you. They want to know what is going on. They want to hear your take on it. I will be asking a question that I have here. Then I will be going into the chat to ask that question. Now, you mentioned the customary law in your presentation, and that really and truly spiked my interest, because here in Jamaica, we have sort of a similar situation, with the indigenous people, the Maroons. I want to ask, however, for Botswana, it seems like it's more formal, for the indigenous people and the indigenous authority. I would like to know from you, Mobato, what is the power dynamics, between the persons who are the holder of the customary law and those persons who are elected through election?
That's actually a very fascinating question. I'll say they're complex. So we all live in an institution where we're in a society where we tend to undermine culture, or undermine pre-colonial culture as Africans and of the African diaspora, and sometimes that comes out in different ways. But there also, in Botswana's context, there's also an aspect of noticing that traditional leadership remains the most powerful leadership in the country. The soft power is incredibly powerful, in that, for example, let's say in election season, or even when politicians go visit rural areas, the first point of contact they're going to is the khotla. The khotla is the area in which the chief resides. So their first point of contact is going to that chief, introducing themselves to the chief with extreme humility, telling them why they're there and who they're going to see. If they are given permission, they can be able to continue engaging. If they're not, then they just don't receive it. So it's a lot of complexities towards it. Also, the usage of the practice of the customary laws are very common. For example, they are, in comparison to using the statutes, using the judiciary laws, you'd find that some cases may be able to be dealt quicker than going to a small claims court, for example. And certain issues, especially when there's family dynamics, you can use customary laws to help support your case. So the complexity of that power, it's not linear, but we do see when the culture, because there is an actual House of Chiefs represented within the parliament system. So you do see where customary laws take precedence over certain aspects, but you also see when statute laws take preference. But this is more like, it's not an either or, it's more like a balanced relationship of different forms of structure, different forms of systems So we still have the pre-colonial political system. We have the post-independent political systems functioning together, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes not. But essentially, there's more of a balance in that. But we do see, in terms of soft power, yeah, customary laws and customary systems take a lot of precedence there. It even shapes, for example, because we do have Bokhadi would be,
Right.
it's mistaken as bride price and it's been seen as bride. I just don't know how to place it because I don't want to defend it, but essentially, it would be, you know, it's seen as a trade-off between cows and the woman, but it's more as an investment into the actual family. It's actually paying for it's the children's inheritance. So that's why it's a bit difficult to explain it. But through Bukhari as an example, we've seen banks create services that can accommodate that type of Bukhari setting, and that's a customary setting. So it's more of a harmonious thing where the modern living and modern society engages with the cultural living and cultural society. So yeah, I think that's the best way I can.
I think that you've answered that question perfectly. So, and it's quite fascinating to hear and see how that indigenous power and that elected power mesh to really and truly create some form of holistic environment. That is actually lovely. I'm going to be taking a question from the chat now, and it's from Miss Ifia Wilson, and she's asking how much of the population speaks the indigenous language. Before you answer, Mabato, I would like to peer that question, because here in Jamaica, we have a local language as well, the Patwa. So I want to ask if there's any social implication, regarding the language that is spoken. For example, here in Jamaica, if you are able to speak English and enunciate well, then you are regarded as somebody, higher up in the society. However, if you're strictly speaking the mother tongue, then not so much. So with answering the question, how much of the persons in the populations are able to speak the indigenous language, tell us of the social implication that it has as well.
Yeah, it's definitely complex because there are different settings. We do have that element of the better English you speak and the nature and how your accent is presented. There is a social power and dynamic towards that. We do have that. I'm sorry, I need to switch on my light because my sun is setting. So sorry about that. So we do have that implication, but in terms of there are also cultural implications. So Botswana has a kind of uniqueness in that people from wherever across the world, when they come to Botswana, they actually assimilate and want to learn the language. So it's not foreign to see Europeans, white people, or Asians, or Indians speak Setswana, which is the local language. It's not a foreign thing to see. It depends where they are as well. So the context as well is looking at how, as I said, Botswana is one of the most unequal societies in the world, right? So in the city, yes, you speak English in specific areas, you would receive better assistance. But if you speak Tswana in specific areas, for example, if you are at the police station and you're speaking Tswana, it's likely for you to get more assistance because you feel more relatable. But if you're in formal spaces like banks, there would be the assumption of English and enunciation, but that's just a social dynamic. Right. And it is complex. I'm speaking on a general level. But when you go to specific rural areas or specific towns, for example, Khansi is a village which is largely characterized by Afrikaners, who are white people, descendants of the Dutch, and San people, which is Bakwe, one of the first inhabitants, in country. You'd find that the descendants of Dutch descendants speak Setswana, and it's common for them to speak Tswana, and it's almost expected for you to speak Tswana. So if you are of a different race and you're in that area, it's not likely for people to think of English as a go-to. But there is a lot of people who, Botswana is also a very highly literate country. I think we were at 89% in terms of our literacy. So English is quite a common language, even in rural areas. The preference would be for Setswana. So it is a commonly spoken language, not just by the citizens but by the inhabitants in general, irregardless of race.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank you for that. I have one more question, and then we'll hand over to Chicago. Somebody mic is on. Okay. Right. So one more question, and then we'll hand over. No, I'm a political science major myself, and I really want you to specify in political history and how is it that it affects the political culture today that we are experiencing now. So I want to ask you, how is it that the politics that was practiced way back then, if you can say or see if it have any effect on how politics is now carried out in Botswana today?
That's a broad question. Can I just share maybe that there have been certain effects that have become, for example, patriarchy, right?
Right.
So
share those effects.
Yeah. So in terms of political leadership, it's largely male-led. Historically has been male-led, but Botswana pre-colonially, before the scramble, was a place where you would find different forms of leadership: male, women, male leadership, women leadership, and youth, because there were different forms of political systems and societies. However, even culturally speaking, it's overwhelmingly shaped and formed by men, from advisors to chiefs. And even though the current understanding of the chieftaincy system is the firstborn becomes the next chief, they largely prefer, because that's quite a gender neutral law, I guess, but it's largely men. And so due to the global effects of patriarchy, it has encroached in the political space and atmosphere as well. So there is there's a growing need for more youth and women participation. But I'm coming from a party politics perspective. Outside of party politics, and I just speak on the just general atmosphere, I don't know if there's anything specific you can ask towards that for me to have a better way to answer.
So I think that's a very, very good answer to the question, and that is the answer that I was looking forward to, because you know, in the political space that we are now, if a person wants to move to another country, they would want to know what is the likelihood as a woman, as a youth, that I can really participate and have a seat in the political arena. And I think most of our countries are really and truly plagued by patriarchy and its hands in different industries that we want to, you know, enact in and participate. Really and truly great answer. I really and truly think that you answered it perfectly. So right now, though, I will be handing over to the editorial lead to tell us just a little bit about the African Press Club and where we can find them.
Okay, thank you so much, Deontay, and thank you once again, Mabato, for wonderful responses to the questions. Thank you, everybody who has tuned in to today's event, the African Press Club Discover Botswana series. If you would like to be part of what we're doing, please drop your emails in the chat. We have a monthly newsletter, so you can receive our newsletters. Drop your emails in the chat. And then you can also check out our website, see what we do, www.africanpressclub.com, www.africanpressclub.com. And if you would like to send us an email, you can send that to info@africanpressclub.com. We usually have monthly events that spans different topics. You know, it could be political, it could be economic, it could be cultural, all sorts, based on African experiences and of course, African diaspora experiences. So we hope that you will become part of our community, that you will participate, and we look forward to connecting more with you in the future. And do we go back to the questions? Deontay, I think I saw one question in the chat from Dr. Rachel Brown.
Yes, we are going right back to the question right now. And I hope that you guys are typing up those emails to send and be a part of the newsletter. I am a part of the newsletter because I want to know what is happening from our point of view. See, we have an email right there. Keep sending those emails, everybody. I know that we want to be in the know. I will be taking a question from Dr. Rachel Brown. Pick up you, love she. The question is, let me find it. The question is, yes, when traveling to other places in the world, particularly Western areas, what things have been the biggest source of culture shock for you if you have done that? I know for Jamaica, we're very American centric, so really and truly don't get a lot of shock. But what it is like for you, let us know.
Oh, wow, there's a lot. I'm trying to like scale them down. Well, pre-COVID, I did travel frequently to other African countries, Asia and Europe. They were opportunities for me to go to the North American part, Canada and USA, but they just never seemed to happen. But I think my biggest culture shocks for sure was how people are like on their phones all the time and like not necessarily engaging, or how fast certain things are. So I imagine coming from a space where you're used to greeting people, there's a level of friendliness that is overtly familiar to a space where
Nobody speaks.
Yeah. So I think that was one of the largest ones. And what else can I say? I think that was largely that. Oh yes, and I think when I was in France in the summer, it was a little bit of a shock to me at how late the sun sets. You have, when you're in your early 20s in the summer in Paris and the sun sets at 10, it's it's a nice vibe. That's the best way I can say it in a recorded meeting. But yeah, I think it's that, and maybe the weather. The summers aren't really as hot as I would assume them to me. And the culture shock for the most part. But everything else is pretty, I mean, we're all pretty globalized at this point. Right. So we all have different ways of, like, collective ways of engaging
and knowing,
which is amazing for 7 billion people to be able to do that. I think that's pretty dope.
Right.
Well, Mabato, I think just a few observations that I made from your responses and the actual presentation. When you talked about the pre-colonial political system, like the judiciary system, a lot of African countries have that, and most people don't practice it anymore. And so when we talk about the chaos and the crisis that African countries are going through today, it's like trying to go between what was existing before and what was functional in those societies to trying to become another type of society. It's part of the problems and the issues that we have. You did mention or insinuate that actually the systems were very democratic. In my country too, in my traditional system, it was very, very democratic. Democracy wasn't invented by the West. Our cultures, most of the cultures were democratic. And to the point that you also mentioned, the man and the woman having a sort of shared governance. So it was a dual system of governance where, yes, men took the lead, but women had a say. They were not completely relegated to the background. So it was like a partnership between the two. But then you go to the global sort of uni system where men lead everything. So women lost a lot or were dispossessed of the powers that they had traditionally. So it's good to hear that. Hopefully we may, in some ways try to get back to that, because I think it's part of the solutions to some of the issues that we face as Africans. And then I was very happy to hear about the keto food, Botswana keto food. So if you want keto, you can go to Botswana. It's not only in London. So
I think I'll have to go and try the worm.
Keto was here before today.
And try the worm.
And then that ties into when people talk about intermittent fasting. Today there's a rave about keto and intermittent fasting. And I usually ask, why do you need to go to someone to teach you how to do intermittent fasting? Just don't eat and it will happen. You don't need someone to tell you about that. And then very fascinating also is the health system, the traditional health system, the herbs. And that is why it worries us that most of the trees are disappearing. The herbs are there for something. Nature is complete. And we hope that people will begin to plant trees again, because those herbs are very useful in healing. And I think people need to realize that not everything modern is sort of cool. There are some things, that are traditional that need to come back into our lives, because they were there, they existed, and they were given for our own benefit. So I will stop talking for now. Oh, before I go, question, Mabatu. So you talked about Botswana having over 20 languages. So my question is, politically, how do you balance between the different ethnic groups? Do you have a kind of sharing of power arrangement, formally or informally, that makes it possible for everybody to be represented?
Okay. Oh, you've said a mouthful. I even want to add a few notes. Before I answer your question, I wanted to make a few notes in terms of the forms of leadership here. In our political systems, there were political systems where there was some male leadership that women were supporting, but there was also women leadership that were purported by men. There was also back in the day, you would see a lot of queer leadership, a lot of leaders that were based by having different forms of genders and gender identities that were beyond the binary that we see now. So if we're thinking of how we can work together, a way that works together, we should look into like beyond the binary of male, female, like the real inclusivity of the types of leadership then, because even at the time, and a lot of people have a point of contention to what I'm saying because of their own personal homophobias, I'm just referencing history. There was a kind of spirituality had its own kind of like social power. And those who were closer to God or closer to spirit in different types of way were more revered. So people who have like intersex persons, for an example, or people who would be seen or understood as transgender or non-binary people, would be assumed to be closer to God or to the universe, to be closer to God, because God is genderless or genderful, So there were all these different functions of how our leadership structure and our political leadership structure was so intertwined with our religious structures and our cultural and economic structures. So I think that type of intertwining led to having multiple forms of representation in terms of leadership, but at the same way, it doesn't allow for diverse. So for example, with the religious and political engagement, we see now the church and the state today, it's the similar functions, how exclusionary it can be. So this is not to say that the previous forms were perfect. We're saying we have so much history, 200,000 years worth. We should be at a point where we can develop something cutthroat, cutting edge and innovative for ourselves, and not, through the sentiment, discard our past history. So to answer your question on the languages, so there are 20 different indigenous languages, but only 2 official languages. And this has come with a lot of point of contest from people from those minority groups who are non-Tswana speaking, and because that's how they tend to subgroup, right? And in my opinion, because I think a lot of my DNA is from that non-Tswana speaking part, in my opinion, I believe there's a lot of room for the government to be more holistic and inclusive of our languages, from being preserved, from the preservation of these languages to be taught in schools, because the languages that exist in this country are one of the most oldest languages on the planet. And some of them being extremely advanced, that come from San people and that come from Khoi people. And this lack of appreciation and inclusion in our formal systems is leading towards the different forms of depreciation and leading them to be vulnerable to different forms of discrimination. So I do believe that the government has a lot of work to do in increasing and encouraging cultural diversity sincerely, institutionally, with our different tribes. But at this moment, and there is a lot of debate around this in the country. On the other side, there is talks about not trying to create tribalism, because, you know, our continent is plagued with conflict that comes from tribalism. You know, we've seen this in different parts of the continent. I don't want to mention any by name because the pain still exists, honestly. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of grounding work that we have to do. I actually came and mentioned them because I saw, when we talk about Botswana, globally, we do not talk about the indigenous diversity. We talk about ourselves as one. And I personally believe that we are characterized, we are united by how different we are.
Right. But I would want to ask though, it is not because of the language that you would have wanted to speak. There's no limitation for you to ascend in the leadership sphere in Botswana, right?
Is it in political leadership?
Right.
So if no, but there are other aspects of, so, you know, I only say no because our previous president isn't the best Tswana speaker, but he had different forms of power by being the son of the first president.
Okay.
So it's a bit tricky there, but you can ascend into different forms of leadership if you don't necessarily speak the language well. But what is important is not just the language, is how you're accessing and preserving culture. Right. So in the country, what are your personal cultural practices, and how do we see these personal cultural practices? Are you engaged? Like, a lot of us who live in the city, we all have home villages where we come from. And this doesn't mean that we were born there or we have a specific engagement there from birth. This means, where is your father or where is your mother from? And how, and your children are going to be from these places as well. So that's how the culture is preserved and carried. And what is your relationship with these villages? And because there is a respect towards your cultural identity in this country in terms of political leadership.
Right. Yeah. Love that. Love to hear that. And that sounds really and truly realistic. I think the discussion that we are having could lead into this question. And I want you to answer for me, you know, just one. What is the greatest misconception of your culture or your country? You know, probably from us here in the West, or just, you know, surrounding territories there. What is the greatest misconception?
Yeah, I think it's that we are docile. People think because Botswana are peaceful people that we're docile people, particularly, I guess, in the area that we come from, because we don't have any notable, significant wars that have been marketed or shared. But I believe that just because you are non-violent doesn't necessarily mean that you're docile. There's a idiom in our country that says, the translation is the greatest form of war is the war of words. Actually, that's what it says. Meaning the greatest form of war is the war of words. And we enunciate our violence in our language and the way we articulate ourselves. So it's not necessarily that we're docile. We are just not, we know how to, we have a different form of articulation to defend ourselves. Sometimes it can come across as, I guess the West would see it as arrogance, because they're just ways that you just don't treat Black people. You do not treat us in specific ways, and we will communicate that. And it will come across as arrogance in some parts. But that is after people making the assumption that we are docile people because we're warm and friendly and welcoming.
Right.
Yeah, so do we still have, you know, we have to be winding down. How many more questions? We can maybe take 2 more, Deontay.
Well, I had some questions. Here from persons who I invited from WhatsApp. They sent me quite a lot of questions. It's just that it's not in the chat, over like 10 to 15, but we don't have the time.
Okay, you know what you do, Deontay? ask 3 questions together. Let's see if we can at least ask the questions together.
Right. So I have one very heavy detailed question, and then I have 2 easy questions, after which we'll just hand over to Madam Lead. So the first question I want to ask is coming from myself, because I am a political science major, and we're just learning about Botswana and the history of its political culture. What I want to know is, were there any physical violence, last resistance, in gaining the country's independence? That's number one. From my friends that I invited, one question is, how is education handled in your country? And 2, have you ever experienced any sense of racism or classism in your country? So that's number 3.
Okay. All right. So was there any form of physical violence in gaining independence? The answer is no. It was mostly psychological. We have had concessions in the independence period. And that's why I think that's actually how the idiom came out, that the highest form of war is the war of words. Because not only did we negotiate protection, but we also had to negotiate not being colonized by other countries, by the Rhodesian government. And we largely used words. And then when we were stressing our independence, we then again used words. So no, nothing physical, but a lot of back and forth, a lot of mental gymnastics. In terms of there was a question on what is the education level?
Yes, what is the culture of the educational system in your country?
Okay, so Botswana is a highly literate country. It is common for people to be bilingual in Tswana, well, trilingual, Tswana English and their indigenous language across. The education is free. There's private education, but there's also education given to the state. The government also provides grants and loans for no interest loans for students who want to go to tertiary education. So a lot of our population would be educationally trained to at least like BA level or diploma or certificate level. The government also provides scholarships for academically excellent students to study anywhere across the world. And in the country nationally, they give you student allowance, they give you book allowance. Some universities do have housing that is also granted to you, so you would get free housing. And then they pay for your education completely. These are payback loans, non-interest, but they're also, depending on what you study, they can be seen as viewed as grants. If you have a scholarship, you would travel literally. You could be placed anywhere across the world. We even have some people who are based in Jamaica on scholarship in Botswana. They have their housing covered for them. They have student allowance. They've got book allowance, all given by the state. Right now, there's a lot of development for increasing the quality of education in Botswana, as we are seeing, a few a rise in certain school dropouts in some areas in the country, an increased failure rate in other areas of the country. A lot of it is based on access to infrastructure, and adequate infrastructure. But in this new economic strategy by the government, they have 4 different priority areas post-COVID, which is tourism, education, health. I think I'm wrong on health, but like tourism and education are one of the 2 of the 4 pillars. And within education is them like investing in education. So we do see that commitment from government. Have I experienced racism and classism in Botswana? I have definitely experienced and witnessed more classism than I have racism. When I was a child, and I think it's because I grew up in a middle income family, and I grew up in a multiracial, space. I went to a multiracial school, but I definitely had my first experience of racism in South Africa. So I was a bit, protected from that light, but it depends on which part of the country that you do come from. I do know that there are people who have experienced a different form of racism in some of the tourist areas in the country, like around some services around the Okavango Delta, some areas in Hansi. but a lot of it is coming from outside, if I'm going to be honest. A lot of it comes from people settling into Botswana and not adjusting to our culture and to not assimilating really. And there is the intersection of racism and classism through people who are hired and are given low-paying wages. So I think it's also falling into where you are on a classism level. Botswana is highly unequal, as I did share. So you are likely to experience more classism than you would racism from time to time.
Okay. Love to hear that. Love to hear that. And that is all from my end. I know that is really and truly bittersweet that we are at the end. We hope that we had more time. We could have asked more questions and really get down into the conversation. But as we said before, if it is that you want to, follow the conversation, and you can send your email in the chat and you'll be added to the African Press Club newsletter. It has been a time. We have learned so much, and I know for a fact that I will be keeping in close contact to Mabato because I want to learn more about Botswana, and probably she can help me to come over there. We have learned a lot about their culture, a lot about their political system, about their economical system, and I know for a fact that we are now ignited and interested in the world of Botswana. I've been Deontay Livingston. I've been your moderator for today. It has been an absolute pleasure. I must say, thank you so much to the African Press Club for having me. And, also thank you to the Every Mickle Foundation as well, who's a partner organization with this event. If it is that you guys would have want to, follow Every Mickle and everything that we are doing, you can follow us at Every Mickle JA on Instagram, and as such you can click our Linktree link in our bio, get in touch with us, know what we are doing, come on board if you need to come on board. We welcome it and we invite your presence there. Again, thank you, and it was great honor that I was here today and was able to guide this conversation. Over to you, Madam Lead.
Oh, please stop making me feel old. My name is Chioga, not Madame. Sir Deontay. Look, Deontay, don't run away yet. I mean, it's so sad because you said, now I feel guilty. You said there's so many other questions from people you invited. And it's just like, we don't want to keep people online for too long. So how many questions do you have there?
No, it's fine. I have, let me see. I think she answered the men and women vote. I think we have spoken extensively on that. That is a question that I got. What religion is most practiced in your country? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, around 7 questions, but I think we would have hit them at some point in time in our conversation. And that is why when we had the 3 questions, I chose those questions because I don't think that we would have answered them. Also, I had another question about economy, and again, I really and truly believe that we would have answered them. About the presentation was concise and really and truly covered those questions. So we're good.
Okay, so Mabato, look, there's something that you mentioned that I think you're probably gonna catch hell for it when you talked about queer leadership. I'm sure you're going to catch hell.
Yeah.
On that. It's a touchy, very sensitive conversation in Africa. And for those of you that are joining us now, don't worry. This is being recorded. If you drop your email in the chat, we have a monthly newsletter, so you will receive the recording on the monthly newsletter. I mean, this presentation was fantastic. You want to sit down at your leisure time and listen to it again. Talking about queer leadership, it's good that you brought it up because I agree with you that African traditional spirituality was more inclusive of different genders. It wasn't rigid. All sorts of people were included in the society and had their place and were able to live a normal life. I think the crisis and the problem comes to when you talk about, or most people converted to the religions of Islam and Christianity. And so those religions, they're not in bed with, this gender, how do I
gender identities and
exactly
fluidities. Yeah.
So that's where it gets tricky for people, because they will tell you that the Bible doesn't accept this or doesn't accept that.
Yes, definitely.
So it's a long conversation, so we'll leave it at that. But it's something that we need to work out within our countries as Africans. There was something else that you brought up. I wrote down. Okay, I can't see it now. But one final question before we go. Most African countries have much older people in leadership positions and in decision making. Do you have younger people jumping into politics in Botswana?
Yeah, this is so funny because on Twitter, I asked this question to the leader of opposition. So the answer is no, but we do have an increased interest. So what I've noticed is a lot of young people aren't in party politics specifically, but a lot of young people are development practitioners. So you'd see a lot of, there's quite an increase of civil society groups and a lot of young people being community advocates in their respective villages and in towns. But in terms of the actual leadership structure, the political leadership structure, it's largely informed by men. I actually, 2 days ago, I tweeted to the president of the opposition leadership and asked him, what are you doing about the involvement and inclusion that's sincere of women and young people in leadership? Because ever since 1966, there have been less than 20 women as members of parliament, and there's been one person under the age of 30 ever since 1966. It's been 56 years. So the answer short term is no, but there is a lot of leadership in the apolitical space that is informed by young women, by women, and by young people.
Okay, Mabato, I think that you have all it takes to jump into that space. Seriously. Seriously, think about it. I mean, there's so many wonderful
Indeed.
Deontay too.
I was saying, seeing how she's so poised and so knowledgeable about her country, they should have some kind of national ambassador system, and she would be so well placed in that system. She knows so much. That's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Deontay.
Well, that's from me. I'm looking forward today. I will hear that you have become the president or vice president of Botswana.
I received
something in those lines, or the governor of a state. You have the capacity. You can do it. So thank you so much for everybody who joined us today and has stayed till the end. Deontay, for some of those questions, we can send it to Mabato and she can answer, and then we can send it through email. So if your question did not get answered today, please drop your emails and we will be contacting you. Again, this has been an African Press Club event. If you would like to follow us on social media, it's at African Press Club. If you would like to send us an email, it's info@africanpressclub.com. Check out our website, www.africanpressclub.com. I mean, this has been spectacular, right? Mabato, Bokani was supposed to be here, but because of technical difficulties, she couldn't join us, and you covered every aspect of it. Like, you did so well. I'm so impressed by your presentation, by your performance. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Everyone that is on the call, I hope that you will join our future events. We usually have at least one event in a month. We look forward to seeing you soon. And it has been my pleasure to host you today. I am Chiogo Constance Ikoku, and I am the editorial lead at the African Press Club. I know that so many people would have, had things to do on a Saturday, but they knocked it off and came to be with us. We really, really, really appreciate that. and we look forward to seeing you again. So thank you so much. This is the end of the program, and take care now, everybody, and see you soon. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.